So thank you all very much for joining me for this session. I think that there isn't a business leader here or around the country or the world that hasn't recognized the serious threat to their business that cyber attacks can pose, with hacks like Sony, Anthem Healthcare, and Ashley Madison hitting the headlines this year. However, it can sometimes seem like an uphill battle against this ever-changing threat that requires more and more of the IT budget, but it's very difficult to know where to spend it, how to get the right people, and what your policies should be. So that's what we're here to discuss today. I'd like to welcome Val Romani, who is just a great example of the kind of experienced technical candidates that lots of boards are looking for now. She's the board member at Aberdeen Asset Management, as well as 3 other organizations. But she used to head the security company Dambala, and she worked at IBM for many years. And then we have Carlos Moreira, who's the chief executive of WISEeKey, the Swiss internet security company. He's also a UN expert on cybersecurity and has advised a whole long list of great organizations, including the International Labour Organization, the WTO, and the World Bank. And finally, we have Rod Wallace, the Chief Information Security Officer at Pearson, the education company, and former owners of the Financial Times. He oversees information security for 40,000 employees in 70 countries, serving millions of learners. And he was previously at Secure Logic and Nortel Networks. So thank you all for taking the time to come and speak to us today. I feel like the refrain in the last few years has, constantly every cybersecurity company that I meet is the hackers are already on the inside, that everyone has to assume that not only they will be attacked, but that they have been attacked already, which frankly, if I was a chief executive, would make me panic and not put anything in email ever. But let's start with that assumption. And what I wanted to talk through is, how do companies approach this first, before a potential attack, during a potential attack, and then afterwards? So I wanted to ask you all first, is prevention even possible? I wonder if Val, you can take that first.
Is prevention, 100% prevention possible? No, I don't need to tell anyone that. I think what's important before the attack is not so much prevention as making sure you have the right plans in place. So I would say there's really 3 things that certainly with the boards I'm working on are really critical, the companies I'm working with. I mean, the first is obviously to have a cybersecurity strategy. And by that, I don't mean a document that sits in a drawer. I mean something agreed right across the company, from the CISO and the technical team right through to the board. That's well agreed, that's understood, that really looks at it from the perspective of the bad guys. If I were a bad guy, how would I get into this company and what would I want to get? And too many companies still are not really thinking that way. They're still hoping to build a plan that sort of presupposes that they won't be attacked, rather than really digging in and saying, if I were going to be attacked, where would it be? The second area I think is really critical is to have a crisis plan. We probably will be breached. Do people know what they're going to do? Do we have a plan? I mean, the worst thing we could ever do, right, is scramble after the event, and I know we'll talk about that. But before it ever happens is the time to put that plan in place, to know what the roles are, to test it, to practice it, to rehearse it. One of the boards I'm on does simulation work so that we really understand, what would happen if the worst happened, and would all our ducks be lined up. And then the third piece, and we can talk about all of these in more detail, but the third piece is really communication right across that company. How do we on an ongoing basis keep those plans going? How do we create the kind of dashboards and forums and communications that allow us to keep looking at this across the business and make sure that strategy stays live and that we keep on top of it and that we all understand what we have to do?
Carlos, do you think that prevention is it all possible?
So your point before that we are all attacked already and we are all infected already is actually true. I was in Geneva when the World Wide Web was created. I was the Chief Security Officer of the United Nations, and I worked with Tim Berners-Lee and others designing what was the ground zero of the World Wide Web, and there was no security design on the web. So what we are doing now, everything we do is on the top of the web, so we cannot expect to have a security play if the infrastructure itself is not secure. So now, the way it works, that those infiltration, is like your immune system. You have viruses already. We all have viruses, but we also have the way to defend ourselves against those viruses. So our body reacts to infection, and the body neutralizes infection. So you need a dynamic process. The same thing happens on the internet. So organizations are being already attacked. They are being, in many cases, infiltrated. But it's actually the lack of process in the organization that makes those attacks so easy. For instance, how many people use secure email? How many people use a strong authentication, digital identities to send an email which only is open if you understand who is the source of the email? How many organizations encrypt the data when they upload the data to the cloud? You know, Snowden was asked, what will have prevented you to hack the US government? And his answer was encryption. If the US government would have encrypted all the records, I will not have been able to hack, because the only thing that could happen is encrypted records. So the facilities are there. Technology is moving so fast that we do have many tools, but the problem we are facing now is that they are not yet implemented in the policy of the organization. Minister says something which is very important, is that we have to move that from the IT department to the boardrooms. It's only when the CEO of organization gets to know the threats. You know, I sometimes meet with very large CEOs of big organizations that don't understand cybersecurity. Just walk them 5 minutes on their dark web. Just bring them into the dark web. Let them see what happens in the dark web when you have credit card transactions being executed real time, when you have people selling crypto and selling interception software to other people. So it's a very well-organized economy of hackers. This is not anymore the young kid in the garage. This is a very well-structured economy, and where hackers are making a lot of money out of this.
Are they surprised when you do that?
Absolutely. They are like, a horror movie. I mean, they then immediately realize that this is so close to them, that this is not like something that eventually will happen in a denial situation, which is now. And then they start to take decisions. An organization, even the largest organization in England, largest bank, will maybe need to invest 100,000, 500,000 pounds just to get totally secure and encrypt everything. And by doing that, you reduce 99% of your cybersecurity attacks and threats. You're going to be attacked, but the hacker will get data which cannot exploit it because they don't have the cryptographic keys which you will need. In Switzerland, our company does e-voting. We were the first company in the world letting the Swiss citizens to vote online. So this is happening for the last 12 years. I mean, imagine how many ISIS of the world would love to hack the democratic system of a country. They didn't manage to do it. Why? Because it's a point-to-point encryption process, everything authenticated, servers are authenticated, the data is transferred through quantum fibers. So the technology is there. What is not there yet is the willing to solve the problem. We are still on a denial phase here. Everybody's surprised and being attacked. We should move now to a defense phase where people are going to be announcing best practices on cybersecurity and how people are solving problems so the others can get inspired by them.
Rod, are you as positive about the technology?
I think technology is there. You know, oh, sorry. The question was, sorry. Go ahead. No,
I wanted to see if he agrees with you.
Sure. He's a CTO, so he should be asked that question.
Well, I'm going to slide from that question into maybe answering the other question that you put in the panel. And while I think technology is obviously very helpful, and there are many things you can do from a technological perspective to mitigate a number of the risks and threats that we face. What I would come back to then around prevention is there are figures out there that I don't really dispute. This is many of the and most of the security incidents and breaches we face are typically from inadvertent activities of the employees of the companies or organizations in which we work. And so to me, building upon what the co-panelists have said, really arming the people that you work with and creating a culture to look out for the sorts of things that could be exploited is an additional approach that I would suggest. And as the individual who was responsible for sending out the phishing mail to the FT, that was part of our exercise in prevention as well, building the culture and having people recognize this. And I do have to say, the feedback that I got from those that clicked on the phishing link, I can tell you it tended to be the people that, as it says, it was the people who clicked on the link, and feedback from...
Personally, I didn't think that the journalists should have warned them. I felt like everyone should have fallen for it and then learnt their lesson.
Well, I can tell you reading feedback from people as erudite and with great vocabularies and writing styles at the FT is Let me just say colorful and highly
different
entertaining
class
to
of
read.
feedback.
Yes, but I know that they're not probably going to click the link next time. So.
Yeah, certainly. But on the technological front, because you're really positive about encryption, but some people worry that if you encrypt everything going in and out of your network, you've no idea what's going in and out of your network.
Yeah, I guess encryption doesn't mean that you encrypt everything. I mean, a file, you have what you call the PII, personal identifiable information. Then you can add attributes to that file, and those attributes are a block of information that can be encrypted in different ways. And you can have decryption keys, then you can be distributed to the organization. So the technology is very mature. I mean, people sometimes, I'm working a lot with defense, and defense has been prevented people accessing nuclear silos for many years. These people are using PKI, public infrastructure, has been there for something like 30 years. We still use very sophisticated methods to protect infrastructure. They are very difficult to hack because you will need to hold the root keys, then they are stored in ultra-secure silos. So this technology is there. It's not being used only. The problem we are facing now is that the cyber, in the World Economic Forum, which I am a member, we study the investment on cybersecurity from companies. I mean, hackers are investing by far more money on cybersecurity attacks than we invest in cybersecurity defense. Technology is there for sure.
Okay, well that's interesting because that's a sort of age-old question, is how much of your budget should you be spending? Because theoretically a company could spend everything but then it wouldn't have anything to protect. Val, how do you approach the budget question?
Again, I think it comes back very much to the strategy, and I think it's about treating cybersecurity as a part of your risk management process as opposed to, how much do I spend on the latest tool? You really have to think about what are the drivers in my business that are going to cause me a problem that I want to do? So areas where you're moving into a new space. So in many of the companies, we're trying to digitize everything. We're trying to make more available through portals. I mean, all of that opens our data. We're doing a lot of M&As in many companies. So I'm trying to encourage the companies to really look at it end to end. And every time we think about something new, it should be a part of the budget for that rather than just a budget for IT. So if I'm going to make an acquisition, or I'm going to move into a new space, or I'm going to move into a new country, a piece of those questions has to be around, well, what am I going to do on security with that? And it needs to be a part of the budget, as it would be with anything else that we're looking at. But I think it's also important to think about, what do we have that's of value to the bad guys? I know one of the groups has looked at, it may have been the World Economic Forum, this notion of cyber value at risk. So we can actually start quantifying, what is the value of what I have and what would be the value to my business if it were to be taken. Therefore, I can start looking at my budget in the context of the value of what I have and what I'm doing in a return on investment case, rather than just the poor, head of IT going and saying, I'd like another $1 million this year, please, because I've really got this new tool, XYZ, that's, the miracle of all miracles. And I know I told you last year I was going to solve every problem, but this year I really am. The more we can look at it in the context of an ROI, the more we can make sure that we do have the right funding in place for the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, just on the investment, I think there has been tons of investment on the back-end part of cybersecurity. I mean, there's a lot of very large cybersecurity companies, and they have become very, very large, selling back-end solutions. Means you're going to secure the fortress approach. People outside are bad people, inside we are all good people. Let's secure ourselves against the external threats. But now this cybersecurity design is finished. I mean, now the threat is inside. When we secure Swiss banks, 99% of the threats are coming from inside. And the current cybersecurity budget allocation has been mainly to buy firewalls and a very sophisticated perimeter defense technology. But we need to secure the people. Now, security has become personal. And you have to secure the individual. You have to secure your clients. You have to secure your staff. You have to molecularize the cybersecurity process so you secure the person. Now, technology is there, there's many good things happening because IoT is coming, 60 billion devices to be connected to the internet. That aggregates to the cybersecurity issue we have on the web. So now we are putting cybersecurity at the device level. Apple got hacked yesterday. It's a device issue. Every single day you're going to have a device issue. So organizations should invest in securing their customers, securing their staff, securing their devices. This blockchain technology coming, which allows you to cyber secure the device at the device level, and devices between themselves can send data. If a device is attacked, the device answers the attack and informs the other devices that how he has solved that attack without the need to go to the back end. So those are the new investment that needs to be done. If we secure the person and we secure the people, we secure the internet, because the internet is becoming personal-centric and not anymore hardware-centric.
Yeah, yeah. So, Rod, how do you get money out of the board then?
Well, there are a few things. I think there's a bit of a push-pull going on. I agree with very much with what Val was saying. There are directives now from organizations like the Financial Reporting Council saying that audit committees and boards should be considering risk management, or be demonstrating effective risk management as part of one of the key fundamentals of the way they operate. And so that kind of gives an incentive and a focus sometimes to the board around that. And so there is that sort of a top-down sort of help that a CISO like myself can have in establishing a budget. The other piece is having an effective discussion about risk and risk tolerance, and really using that process to not just simply say, I'm the security guy and this is how much I want, and stamp my foot. I think if you can position security in the context of the other risks and the tolerance for risks that the business is willing to take, the reasonable business people do make reasonable decisions, and we do get to an appropriate point. I think it is helpful, though, recently we are starting to see we are seeing more sign of the financial impact of a breach and the potential charges. I think for many, many years it was CISOs and other people talking about the fear factor without much to back it up. Well, that fear factor is now becoming reality. We are seeing massive fines. And it's not just the fines, it's also there is quantifiable reputational damage now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because one thing that I've sort of noticed when talking to people is, as much as people were taken aback by the amount of money lost, say, in a Target or a Home Depot breach, these massive US retailer breaches we had in the last couple of years, it's the, oh my God, my emails could be out like Sony Pictures, or oh my God, my personal details could be out like Ashley Madison, that really gets people engaged with the cybersecurity issue, right?
Absolutely. In our business, the number one thing we're not, of course we worry about our emails being out, but really we protect learners around the world, millions and millions of them, and that's, there's a very personal face to that. It's our children. And so when you start to personalize it, somewhat to your point as well, it really does, I think, bring it into the focus for the board and people who would fund this.
I'm sorry, I totally agree with that. I also totally agree with what you're saying in terms of the funding does come, business people are reasonable people. I think there's a real role for the CISO and the head of IT to play, though, because certainly sitting on some boards, it's very hard, as you know, for the average board member to understand this stuff. I mean, most of them are scared of it. If you go and do surveys of board members, they don't ask the tough questions about cyber the way they would about other things, and they don't listen to the pitches, even if they get them, because they just don't understand. You were saying before about getting on the dark web. I urge anyone who's a CISO, really get out there and run training for your boards. I mean, get them to understand from the beginning what it is. One of our boards, we took a couple of the members and some of the senior execs, and we'll probably roll it out. We taught them how to do very basic coding. The head of the company wrote a little golf application, and then we taught him, they actually showed him, what a non-VPN network can do. So if he logs in a hotel or a coffee shop or whatever, how easily everything on his system can be stolen. On his personal device. And once they see those kind of things, it suddenly becomes real for them. So I think it really is, the onus is on us as technical folk to help them understand in ways that make sense to whoever your particular board is, because then the funding will come, and then they will understand. In fact, if anything, they'll want to pile more into you, because now they'll be asking, well, what else do you need? What else can we do?
One thing in line with has been said, and I think it's going to speed up the process on where companies are going to really start to invest serious money on cybersecurity, is the concept, actually this has been discussed in Davos, is the concept of auditing companies on their cybersecurity practices. I mean, we audit company on their financial performances and their books, and we bring external auditors to come into the companies to do that exercise. There's a strong recommendation now to do the same thing on cybersecurity. For the reason you just mentioned, because if somebody loses my data, my personal data, and this is a bank or an organization, is that a negligence? That organization did everything to protect my data? I can basically take legal action against that organization for that act. So this is creating a new dimension, which is the liability of corporations to let those attacks to happen, having the technology to defend those attacks. Obviously, you're not going to take action if a company has done everything possible and is still being attacked. But as I said before, a lot of those attacks and successful attack has been due to negligence at the level of the organization. So the cybersecurity audit is something which is on the table, and I think that will reduce drastically the perception that companies are not doing the right work, because some of them, they are doing it, and we just don't know about it.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to something you said, Carlos, before about, taking people on the dark web, and it's similar to what Val just said about getting people familiar with what's out there. But how familiar do you need to be? Because I feel like there's a bit of a division in opinion about whether people need to know, this hacker group is doing this at the moment to your rivals, to your industry, and whether that's actually really useful information when you're trying to secure a system, or whether really you should be thinking about vulnerabilities that any hacker group that you might not see coming could see.
I don't think they need to be well versed in the detail of that at all. What I do think the board needs to be, and the senior execs need to be comfortable with the concept of cybersecurity, so they can ask the tough questions, so they don't sit there when they're being presented to and go, yeah. They get into huge detail on financials, on the accounts, on the audit stuff. They just need to be familiar enough that they don't feel that they can't contribute to that conversation.
And it's the same thing. Why maybe you need to bring a politician to a very bad area of the city so they understand the criminality of the city? You need to bring them there. I mean, we are walking in very dark areas of the neighborhoods of the internet with assets around ourselves. And we don't have the feel, I mean, anyone on this room will know that in certain areas or certain cities, you're not going to be walking with expensive watches because you might attract a robber. Whether on the internet, we don't have that reflex. CEOs, many times I talk to CEOs, say, this will never happen to me. And actually, we can even hack his mobile phone at the same moment we are having the interview with him, because his mobile phone is totally open. And by the way,
I'm sure he appreciates that.
He's connected to LinkedIn, and he's sending all his email into the LinkedIn, job, which can be accessed. So once you show that person that being the CEO of the organization, he's maybe number one liability, because the level of information he has, nobody else has it, you get his attention, and you get him to go to the board and convince the board to put the right money.
But you don't think that you need to know, this particular Russian state-backed group is hacking banks?
Just show the trade, show the dark trade happening there. And what I think which is essential, what you're going to see there is not only the dark side, the organization behind that. This is extraordinarily well organized. This is like eBay of crime. I mean, it's extraordinarily well organized.
Yeah, that's the kind of question I do get from our board, actually. So once they are familiar with it, they themselves then tend to ask, when you present, incidents we've seen or attacks, they then start to already ask, well, where is it coming from? They start to peel the onion, and that's really, I think, the sign of an engaged board, when they don't just look at some graph you have with a trend on it or something. They start to pick that through, and for me, that's a great sign when they.
I think the other thing that's really important is that we, as board members, don't get ourselves hacked. So the other thing I'm keen to do, I do not want to be the weak link in the chain in any company I'm involved with. And what you say, Carlos, is absolutely right. It's the more senior people on the team. I get M&A data, I get, all the data. I'm, as many senior execs, I'm very diligent. I log on when I'm on a plane, or when I'm in a coffee shop, or when I'm in a hotel, and I do have data. So I think the other thing is really important for them to learn enough to realize just how easily they themselves could be hacked, so that they think carefully before they do download something that was very secure into an application on their own device, so that they can read it on the plane, where it is not at all secure.
Yeah.
And just one thing they immediately get it is that, the dark web was developed by Tor. This is a software that was created by Intelligency. And when Intelligency created Tor, the vision was that we will enter anonymously into an environment where I can then navigate, because nobody knows who I am, into all kinds of transactions. Now, what creates cybercrime on the internet is the anonymity aspect of it. If we start to bring everybody to strong authentication, digital identification, and traceability of email, we kill the anonymity aspect of it, which is the number one reason of cybercrime. Cybercrimes in our days are so efficient because they don't leave trace. I mean, the next threat is coming, which is going to come in within the next month. It's even more vicious threat, is then you're going to receive data, and now they can replace the data. So you are sending an instruction of payment from A to B, and I, hacker, I'm going to replace your data with some data I create. It looks the same, the one that you sent, that reaches the same destination. So that's a very vicious one, because this is now changing the content itself, the integrity of the message.
Yeah, definitely, and that has huge impacts for the markets and the economy. So we've spoken a lot about preparation, how you can try and set the groundwork so that even if you are attacked, you've hopefully protected the most important things within your organization and you've got the buy-in from the board. But what happens during an attack? I think there was some great reporting after the Sony Pictures attack, which had the CEO sort of in a car park being told about the attack on his BlackBerry and being told, oh, by the way, you can't use this BlackBerry either, and don't come to the office because it's full of computers that don't work. And that was obviously a completely, incredibly dramatic attack and very different and destructive attack to what we've seen. But what should leadership be thinking about during an attack? Rod, why don't you start?
Well, I think one of the most important things initially anyways is to have process. In times of crisis, making it up on the fly is just not going to work. It doesn't. And so the thing that will save you, I think, is process that you've thought about, you've practiced. We practice regularly, and most companies that are serious about this do that, so that when the incident does happen, and we know they're going to happen, we all know they're going to happen, that you've got a well-worn set of the things that you do, and people know their job, and that tends to greatly reduce the panic, if you will, that can kind of set in and get really people focused on how do we solve it. So I'd say process is one of the key things.
Carlos, do you want to...
Yeah, you said the right word, panic. When Sony got attacked, actually there was not an attack. When we think attack, we imagine the troops arriving all in once. Sony had a compromise attack internally for over 6 months. So the new attacks are viruses or interceptions then stay dormant in the organization, and they learn your behavior. So those viruses are learning during a silent period of 6 months, sometimes a year, everything about the organization. And once they collect that data, and they have enough power to shut down the infrastructure, then they do an in-house attack. The attack is not from outside, happens from inside. So normally what happens is that everybody panics. And this is a warfare strategy. Panic is always the place when the real attack happens, is during that panicking time. So people should not panic. Should have a very good communication director that knows how to explain that to the press. Because when we say I have been cyber attacked, it can be so many things. I mean, it could be your email is compromised, your websites are down. So not all attacks are as serious as we sometimes have the tendency to read. It's on that panicking process then the hackers do real damage, because everybody opens everything. So I think the question is not to be panic, have a very good communication person, let people to evaluate the damage of the attack and then take the measures, but in gradual process.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's important to have the process, it really is, and to have it rehearsed and to have it engaged with everybody. So, what's the role of the IT team? What's the role of the CEO? What's the role of the board? By the way, what's the role of legal? Are we going to have to tell the regulators, so that the whole piece is organized so that you're not scrambling at the event? I think the other thing that's really important, though, is that we do take it seriously. So if you look at the target attack, which we like not to talk about in a sense, but on the one hand you don't want to panic, you want a process that rolls into place. On the other hand, you don't want to be hiding in the sand for X period of time and pretending nothing happened and not looking into what happened, because then you end up in an even bigger mess. So I think part of that not panicking is also not making statements until you know what's happened. It is important that these threats get communicated very quickly if there's been a major breach, but it's also important that we have the right technology in place, that we understand what data actually did go missing, what actually did that, what was the impact of that attack, so that we're not, on the one hand, either saying something huge happened when it didn't, but equally we're not pretending nothing happened when it did, because what we've learned over history is if you've had a major attack, you're much better to fess up, and admit what happened and explain that you're investigating. And I do think it's important that we have technology in place that many companies offer now to allow us to say what happened to our data, what data was impacted, so that we've got some ability to look at what happened.
I know certainly as a reporter that when I get the first stat of how many, records have been lost, I don't necessarily believe it, and I normally think, that's going to tick up and up and up, and it's not great management.
There is a second piece that I would say with some of the newer attacks and the things we're seeing is in the middle of an incident. I think you also have to. There really is a fog of war, as it were, in the middle of these. But with the kind of attacks we're seeing now, you also sometimes need to ask what's next. Because we're seeing things there are multiple threads in the attack, and you think you've got it, or you think you've covered up the incident, but there's the punch number 2 is just out there, and you're waiting for it. And so they're getting much more complex than they were, say, previously.
So you mean, for example, you might suffer a denial of service attack, but then actually it's a cover for people stealing data.
Right.
Or whatever. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier legal issues and regulators. I mean, when do you call the police? When do you call the regulators? And I know certainly in the US, where I'm based, there's a lot of anxiety about bringing in law enforcement because they feel like, well, we might actually compromise our customers' data. Opening up our systems is not something we agreed to do with our customers. How do you find that balance?
I mean, I'll be interested in what my fellow panelists here say, but I think what's important is as you build that crisis plan, long before you ever have a crisis, that you are engaged with those different communities, the regulators and law enforcement, so that as you begin to see an attack on the very beginning, you can have informal conversations with those groups, just setting it up without actually necessarily sharing all of it. Because you're right, you don't want to start sharing everything before it's the right time when you've really got no idea what's happening. But you want to be in a position where you know who you would go to and they can offer their own guidance, as things progress, if it does turn out that it was a major breach.
Yeah. Actually, in the same way then some corporations are in denial on cyber attack, there are many government offices that they are in denial on attack as well. So
naming no names.
No names.
No names. In Switzerland, because we are a service society, we have many banks. So there is a group with the name Melanie, which is the federal police, that works with the private sector on a daily basis. And to be honest, I will have no doubt to just make an immediate call if I have an issue. I don't expect them they're going to look into my private data. What I'm going to expect them is to give me top advice, because at the end of the day, again, the internet is an infrastructure, it's a utility, it's like power lines, like electricity. So every attack that comes into the UK should be finally and endly the responsibility of the government. They are the one there to protect against that to happen. And they are the first line of defense. Obviously, corporations should develop the second line of defense, but the first line of defense is the government. Many governments are turning that into economic business promotion, say, bring your multinational to my city because my city is more protected than the next city. So this is the kind of pitch that we have to give to government, because no corporation on earth has enough money alone to protect against everything. You need to think in terms of an infrastructure, not a four-wheel drive car because the roads are so bad. No, put the money on the road, not on the car. So you need to put the money on the infrastructure, and government should take that responsibility as a priority.
Yeah, so I would say there are really a couple of approaches we would have to it. If in a specific incident we have enough information where we think law enforcement can realistically do something about the individual or individuals, we'll engage them. There are, however, other aspects of law enforcement where maybe we don't have enough information that they could identify a particular perpetrator and have any chance of a prosecution. But because they're kind of at a crossing point for a lot of us reporting to them, they get a perspective on what's happening that an individual company may not. So some of the governmental information sharing organizations, or just within law enforcement itself, I think it's always, from our perspective, valuable if we can feed that in and then get back sort of a trending or what's occurring. That perspective is invaluable.
Yeah, information sharing has been a huge theme of the last couple of years in terms of regulation, but it's also something that you can do through the FBI or whatever.
Sure.
I just wanted to make one other comment. It's very interesting that we sit here discussing this like this, because we all feel guilty as a company. We somehow, when it's cyber, we kind of feel like, oh, did I do something wrong? Was I negligent? If we had a break-in of our premises with a physical attack, it would never cross our minds. We would say, hey, bad guys got us, and bad guys get people. They break in our cars, they break in our homes, they do bad things, and we never think about whether we should report that. We have somehow to get ourselves to the point in cyber where we say, I have done all I can reasonably have done for my business. I've taken all the right precautions. I've got myself as safe as me and the board and my IT group all felt we should be. We're very proud of what we do. We have the right culture in place. If we get broken into, then there were some bad actors out there who did some bad stuff to us, and we should approach it that way. I think one of the reasons people kind of get themselves in a mess and they hide and they pretend it didn't happen is because there's this kind of notion that it's our fault. And I'm not saying, I mean, in some cases it is. There are companies who don't do the right things. But if we're doing the right things, we should just say, hey, you know, a bad guy got us. They get us in other ways. You know, this is something that we would never dream of not sharing, the fact our house got broken into, right? I wouldn't be embarrassed that I hadn't locked my door, because I probably did lock my door.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, and it brings us on to after an attack, and almost always one of the first questions is, well, who's going to get fired? And I was just wondering what you guys thought, whether there were cases where people should get fired. I mean, we saw in the Target case, the CEO got fired, but almost every single big hack since then, we actually haven't seen that many heads roll. And do you think people should be fired, Carlos?
No, I think it should be, if somebody comes to me and say, hey, I had been hacked, I will actually reward that person versus fire that person, because it's exactly the damage happens by the fact that people are in fear to say, I've been hacked because they're going to get fired. So the human reaction there is very important, that we do not kill the messenger. I mean, one of the things that are happening now, you know, we do all fire simulations, you know, then we have to run out of the buildings. Fire.
Need a warning at the start.
Correct.
Yeah.
Who is doing cybersecurity simulations? You know, this is a great practice to company to do a real cybersecurity simulation. Then you are being hacked, and how you will react as a company. Who is going to be the first one to call whom? What is the policies? What are the documents? What to do? Where is the communication activation? This practice is not in companies available. It's amazing. Companies should be.
Some banks do it.
Yeah,
Wall Street does it.
Absolutely.
Citi does
exactly.
it. Yeah.
But that should be mainstream. I mean, the company should know exactly how to react to an attack and a cyber attack, and put a very clear policy in front of their customers.
Well, I want to open it up to Q&A in a second, but Rod, do you think people should be getting fired?
Well, I think that it is important, it's absolutely critical that you be doing risk management. Not doing risk management is just inexcusable. Are you going to be perfect? I think we've already established you're never going to be perfect, but clearly if you're not, I think that's just inexcusable.
Okay.
Can I make one point? I don't believe the head of Target was fired because they had a breach. The head of Target was fired because they didn't do the right things after they had the breach. You know, if you're doing the right things and you've got the right plans in place, and you admit it early on and you handle it in the right way, you're not going to get fired, and you shouldn't get fired. You know, if you're doing the wrong things and you're trying to hide, then the same way as you would if you had a financial issue that you were hiding, and you would get fired for it, right? It's the same deal. As Rod says, this is about risk management. If you're handling it in the right way, it's business as usual, and we have to start treating it that way.
All right, thank you. I want to open it up to the floor, see if anyone else has got questions for our great panel here today. There we are.
Andrew Beckett from Airbus. I'd be interested in the panel's views on the role of cyber intelligence in making your plans and preparation in the event of an attack.
You want to take that?
So the good news is that it's starting to happen. One of the problems we had on the same line of why a person is not reporting the attack because he's afraid of reporting the attack is organizations not reporting among themselves or even with government and has been attacked. So the intelligent aspect of the cyber attack is not distributed immediately. The learning process of defending an attack is of interest of everybody else because other organizations are doing that. The final destination of that is to have that in an organized way as a country base, and the intelligence agencies are working. There is an issue always, you know, how much we want to involve them and what will be the perception of the public on knowing that an intelligence agency is being involved in a cyber attack investigation. I personally, maybe this is my background in the UN, and I have been working all my life with intelligence, I think it's a great asset. You know, I think it's a lot of unconcerned issues about looking in my data and being exposed to this agency. I think an intelligence agency, if it's well designed by the government, has an amazing protection role that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, it's an absolute cornerstone of what we do. And I think as we evolve looking at things like our security operations, we strive to look at how we can take in cyber intelligence feeds, threat intelligence feeds, these sorts of things, and correlate them with things we're seeing, internally as well as externally. So I think it's a cornerstone of many organizations who are really evolving their approach to cybersecurity.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important. And I think, if you're large enough that you can take in those feeds, that's great. If you're not, then look for a security vendor who actually is taking in those intelligence feeds. I mean, in the US as well, we're seeing a lot of organizations come together as the financial community who are sharing amongst themselves anyway. Because I think it's a key part as we look at our strategy and what we're going to do is to say, who are the bad guys? What are they doing? What are they specifically attacking today? It gives us a much better way of handling things than if we were just doing it blind. I think, and as Carlos says, I think it will go on getting more and more important in the way we think about security.
Okay, fantastic. Anyone else? There's one right at the back over there.
Hello. I'm Antonius from Rentokil Initial. Carlos, you made a very bold statement earlier on about anonymity and the internet. My question is, how realistic do you really think that is in terms of, every person or every user who will be using the internet or accessing the internet, be authenticated? I don't think it's realistic, and I'm not entirely sure if, it is the way forward.
So as I said before, the internet was not designed, neither the web, which is on the top of the internet, the software of the internet, was not designed to handle identification. Identification is the reason why the dark web is so successful, because there is not identification in it, it's anonymous transactions. So to bring the internet to a transactional phase, which is exactly what happened now, being able to do transactions without being concerned, you need a strong authentication end-to-end. And that goes from credit card companies, financial institutions, and e-government when they want to do a e-voting transaction with their citizens. The problem we are facing in some countries, I think you have the same issue here in England, is that you don't have a concept of a digital identity. France, Germany, Switzerland, we have digital IDs for 5 centuries ago. So it's very easy for us to figure out why we need a digital ID, because it's just a digital extension of a plastic ID that we have all of us in our pockets. So all these countries are moving towards a digital ID. And to be honest, the questions that I see in Anglo-Saxon world, they are not there. Like the government will know so much about us, we will centralize our digital IDs in one place. So digital identification at the citizen level is must to happen in order to move the internet to a transactional phase. There is a very big projects like Merkel in the European Union is thinking to establish a European ID, every European, not a political ID, but a consumer ID that allows you to authenticate yourself on the internet. It is a political issue. Technology-wise, if we take away the political connotation of all this, is an excellent tool because it allows you to enter the internet in an authenticated way. And once you're in, being able to talk peer-to-peer to other people, then they have the same level of authentication. Also applies to objects. Every object will have a digital ID. I mean, we are connecting, as I say, 75 billion objects to the internet. Imagine not having an identity on those objects. It will be very easy to fake them. So having ID is a must-to-have, but it's a political issue. I know that it's very sensitive here in England. I don't know how it's going to evolve, but many other countries are moving towards having a digital ID.
That's
tough for governments. It's actually probably quite easy for Apple to get everybody to sign up to that.
Or to Facebook. Facebook is already the largest ID provider in the world.
Right.
I mean, the Facebook wall is an identity, right?
And Facebook's been very interested in cybersecurity, creating their own threat exchange and everything. So it is a possibility. Interesting. Yeah. I think we've got time for one final question, if there's anyone out there with one. Right there in the middle.
Andrew McCallum, Transport for London. What would you consider the balance to be between kind of traditional risk assessment exercises, residual risk calculations, and preparing for an event?
Why do you want to take that?
That's interesting. So there was the whole kind of risk framework, business impact assessment, these sorts of things you refer to, I think are absolutely excellent foundational things, unfortunately, they tend to illuminate the things you know about or the things you expect. And these black swan and other events which occur are going to occur. You're never going to outguess. So that's when defined incident response comes in. And so I think over-relying on just risk analysis and over-rotating on are we at our risk tolerance, et cetera, is necessary but not sufficient. No.
Does anyone else have anything to?
No, I think I agree with that. I mean, the only thing I would add is the one piece we also have to really think about is the culture across our business. Is everybody from the top down leading with this notion of a security culture, so that when we do see something slightly out of the ordinary, we spot it. Because the way we're going to see these things that we weren't expecting in a standard process is just by looking for something that just seems a little different. We all know the sort of the behavioral stuff. Is someone staying late at night and downloading an awful lot of documents that he's got no reason to be doing. But I think as we think more broadly on that, and everybody is looking out for, am I just seeing anything in my network, anything in my systems, anything in my people that's just not quite ordinary, will give us a sense of really starting to try to get on top of the things that, as I say, are not expected.
Well, thank you all very much for joining me. I actually think that we've started the conference in an unusually optimistic way for a cybersecurity event. I feel like we've said that the technologies are progressing. There may even be great authentication systems that, for companies that have the right policies, have done the practice, and have got everything in place, their CEOs might even not get fired. So, fantastic. Thank you very much.
That's correct.